Let me get started here. All right, so we're going to talk about the future of Agile coaching. A little bit about me. My name is Andre Simonese. I started in software development in the late 90s, changed careers actually. I was introduced to Agile in 2004. I worked with a little startup in Omaha, Nebraska, and we were acquired by Intuit. We had a product called It's Deductible. That's where I was introduced to Agile. Intuit had their own Agile development methodology called Lean Agile Slice, which was very short-lived. But after that experience, that's where I started learning about Scrum, bought a book. We had some problems I wanted to solve, and I kind of started there. So in 2008, that's when I transitioned to being an Agile coach and trainer, and it's been quite the experience. Very, very enjoyable experience. I love helping teams just do a little bit better than they've been doing. So let me go through this is our agenda. So I'm going to go through a brief history of Agile, definition of an Agile coach, also an Agile competency model I think you'll find very useful that you can take with you for sure. I'm going to talk briefly about the values and principles which form the foundation of everything we do in Agile. A little bit about the frameworks at a high level, the essential attributes of Agile, kind of boiling it down to the basics of what you need for Agile. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the Agile coaching problems that I see in the coaching community and I've seen for several years, and also the solutions. And this is where the solutions will really take us into the future, hopefully. So, brief history of Agile. If you Google history of Agile, you can go way, way back, even farther than this, because there's a lot of things that built the foundation of where we are today. Agile, really, there's a lot of techniques that have been used previously, a lot of ideas. There's a book called The Mythical Man Month, which that was a required reading when I was in computer science in the late 90s. And that also formed the foundation. Waterfall was created around 1970, and then the spiral method. But so it really, where we are today began way back in 1986, when I was still young. 1986, there's a paper that was published called The New Product Development Game, and it was published in Harvard Business Review. This paper was pretty groundbreaking, and actually it's free. If you just Google that, you'll be able to read this for free. It's not very long, and it talked about, it was a case study on several companies that had produced some products quickly and were highly valuable, and they did it a different way. And it talked about how they did it, and it was several different companies, and there were some commonalities on how they produced something valuable quickly. So that is where the term Scrum was used, as they referred to it as in rugby, where there's the Scrum where everybody huddles together, they move as one unit. That's where that term was really coined. 1995, the first paper on the Scrum development process was presented by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland. They had actually done this a couple years before. There were some problems they were faced with, and they thought, oh, wow, okay, so I think this is a really good way to do things. They developed the paper, and they delivered that at a software development conference. 1999, Extreme Programming Explained, that book was published. Gosh, it just seems like it was yesterday, by Kent Beck. He also was faced with a unique challenge and had to find a different way of doing things. In 1996, he had a project at the Chrysler Corporation, and so he thought, wow, this is really great. I learned a lot of things. Let me write a book about this. 2001, all of these people were creating other lightweight development methods. Scrum and Extreme Programming were not the only ones. There were many more. DSDM, feature-driven development, crystal methods, and so forth. So a lot of those folks came together, like, okay, we have all these things in common. What do we call this? They were debating that. A lot of them wanted to call it light or lightweight. They didn't like that. And so they changed it to Agile. And so you can see that at agilemanifesto.org. And that is the foundation of any method, any Agile method that pops up, that it should support the manifesto. Lean Software Development was published in 2003 by Mary Poppendieck, and in 2009, DevOps was introduced. Around 2003, 2004, that's where I started getting into this. I was a new software development manager, actually, from becoming a developer, and we were having lots of problems just in delivering software. So that's when I started reading some books, bought Extreme Programming Explained, which honestly was really confusing at the time. 2010, the International Consortium for Agile, you can see that at icagile.com, was founded by Lisa Adkins. And she wrote, I think, the first book on Agile coaching called Coaching Agile Teams. It hadn't really been talked about before that, Agile coaching. So and this is still going strong. This is kind of a place where coaches can go, or people who want to be coaches and can go and find, they have a learning track and they have approved providers and so forth. And then in 2011 is when the first scaling framework started coming out. In particular, the Scaled Agile Framework, that's the most popular one right now. These other methods were really at the team level. Even though they were scaled in organizations, it just didn't make it out to the public necessarily. And there was a desire from many companies that want to go top to bottom Agile, and so the Scaled Agile Framework was born. And we're going to talk about this one a little bit. And there's other Scaled Agile Frameworks after this that have come out too, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about those. All right, so surprisingly, there's a bit of confusion on even what an Agile coach is. Companies have lots of different needs, and even Agilists are like, well, what exactly does an Agile coach do? Even if you go to icagile.com, there isn't like, here is the job description of an Agile coach. In essence, an Agile coach is somebody who helps others adopt Agile principles and values. That's the bare foundation. Here I actually Googled this and I found some definitions, and there's lots of them that are similar by other Agilists, by other companies, on what actually an Agile coach is. So we'll just take a look at the first one. Agile coach helps teams or individuals adopt and improve Agile methods and practice. And they help people rethink and change the way they go about development. Helping people rethink and change how they do things is an extremely hard thing to do. Change is hard. So there's a lot of nuances in this, and so it's both an art and a science. There's also, the second one talks about the experience. Really, to be an Agile coach, you really need a breadth of experience in different companies. So if anybody's looking, to hire an Agile coach and they're like, well, I've been at this one company and I've only done Scrum. Well, we want somebody with a little bit more experience than that. And I also found, and this is where the confusion, it's really interesting, I think, that, when you look out there, there's obvious confusion on what an Agile coach is. And I found these online, and these are examples of what not an Agile coach is. So let's look at the first one. There's 3 things that they do. They lead teams of developers in this example, often implementing a new methodology for the first time. That's the second thing, implementing a new methodology, and driving organizational change. All 3 of those things are inaccurate. An Agile coach does not lead developers. An Agile coach helps the developers adopt principles and practices. They're not their leader. They have other people who are the leaders. Also, it's not just developers. It's everybody that works with the developers. It's the business side. To be agile, there's a lot of things that have to happen. The stars somewhat have to align, and the Agile coach helps do this. So this is a very myopic view of what an Agile coach does. Also, methodologies. So Scrum is more of a framework with a lot of wiggle room. A methodology implies that it's kind of a checklist. Well, if you just do these things, then you're going to be agile and you're going to be amazing. So it's really that's inaccurate too. And also, they don't drive organizational change. They facilitate and they influence organizational change. The people who drive the organizational change are the people, the leaders in the organization. They're the only ones that are really empowered to do that. The coach will help influence and they will help facilitate that change. So this is a misunderstanding of what an Agile coach does. Now the second one comes from a job description that I found, and I can't even remember where it came from, but there's many like this. So engage throughout the enterprise transformation and facilitate a smooth transformation to Agile process. Facilitate, that's good. Smooth transformation. Transformations rarely are smooth, but that's okay. And that's where the coach's experience comes into play to help make the bumps a little bit smaller, but it's rarely is it a very smooth thing. And the main problem in this is must be safe certified to apply. So this is saying that they want somebody to come in and implement SAFe, the scaled Agile framework. So that is they're boxing in the role of the Agile coach. They just want somebody to come in and implement SAFe. And as we go throughout the rest of the slides, I'm hoping that it'll become more evident kind of why these are problems. I see Agile came out with the Agile competency model, and I find this very, very valuable. And I suggest any one of you that's an Agile practitioner and already an Agile coach or wants to be an Agile coach, take a look at this and kind of find out where you are and do kind of a self-assessment. So these are the areas that an Agile coach can be competent in, but doesn't have to be competent in all of them. So an Agile, starting at the top, Agile lean practitioner. This is somebody who has actually practiced Agile. When I started, I practiced Scrum. I was a Scrum Master. I was also a developer. So I understand at the team level what iterative development is. I understand what small releases are. I understand how the principles and what supports that. Also, there's a teaching aspect. So you want to teach others how to do this. And there's a different skill set in teaching. There, you can go to college, of course, to become a teacher. And so you can be very competent in teaching. Mentoring is one-on-one. You're giving advice, you're giving guidance, and you're giving people personal challenges, growth opportunities, and things like that. There's the technical aspect, how you write code, how you test, how you automate, laying your fingers on the keyboard and laying down some Java, right? So there's the technical aspect to that. There's also a business aspect, talking about product development, making sure you're how to increase your ROI, making sure your customers are happy. So there's a business piece to it. There's also the transformation, the path you take to transform your team or your organization. This requires techniques on how to transform leadership, how to transform team members, meeting them where they are, and coming up with a pathway. So, and this is where change is hard, right? And so having the experience to do that is really helpful. And then facilitation. Facilitation, you're the independent party. You're working with a group of people, helping them come to a decision. You're Switzerland. You don't take sides, and that also is a separate set of skills. And then there's professional coaching. Now, professional coaching is itself another area that you could focus on, right? So you can become an executive coach, even apart from Agile. You can become a life coach. So there's coaching techniques that you can use as an Agile coach. Now, you can say that for a lot of these. You can be a mentor, you can be a facilitator, you can be a professional coach, you can know be an expert in change management when you implement any kind of change in an organization and not just Agile. So each one of these independent areas is kind of its own separate skill sets, and then putting it around the Agile context, this is where it can add a lot of value. Now, one thing to note, there is not one human that can be a guru or an expert in all of these at the same time. So I think it's helpful to kind of know where your strengths are. And actually, I did this myself, and I kind of filled in this uneven pie chart where I thought that I was the strongest, and noticed I'm not terribly strong in some areas, but I'm strong in other areas. So to be an effective Agile coach does not mean you have to be perfect in all of these areas. Some Agile coaches focus on very specific things. For instance, some Agile coaches, they're only Agile coaches for the software development team or the DevOps team or the technical team. So this, in my example, and again, this is a self-assessment. I didn't take a test to determine exactly where I was. So it's using your own judgment. I'm a practitioner. I've done that for years. I think I'm a good teacher. I was actually in retail before I went into software development, and I did a lot of training, and I taught a lot of people how to work with the public and how to use the systems that we had and all those kinds of things. And I really enjoyed that. And actually, before I went into software development, I considered a career in training because I loved that so much. And there's the one-on-one mentoring. I think I'm pretty darn good. Technical, since I have a technical background, I can help developers. Now, I'm a little bit behind in like Java and maybe some of the testing frameworks. That's why I don't consider myself terribly high. On the business side, as far as product development and there's lean startup and lean thinking that really helps deliver from a business perspective value to the customer. I've really just started, and making sure you're building the right thing. That's one of the problems a lot of teams have, is that they may be able to build pretty well and they're pretty agile in that aspect, but they're not delivering the right thing to the customers. I think I have some to learn there. I've been digging in, I've been learning about it, but I think I can improve there. The transformation piece, I've worked with leadership a lot. I understand, I've seen organizations change. I've seen the problems, so I know the gotchas, so I think I'm okay there. Facilitating, that has come natural to me. I've actually taken some classes myself, specifically on facilitating, and have learned quite a bit. And I could take that facilitation, and I have done that even outside of an Agile context. And then professional coaching, I think I could do a little bit more. And professional coaching is really where you help people solve their own problems. You're not mentoring, is more directive, like so here's what you need to do in this situation. Professional coaching is, well, what problems are you trying to solve? Why do you think that way? And so you're asking a lot of questions and you're helping them come to their own conclusions. So this is kind of my take on things. Now, what's interesting is that I took this to my business partner. I'm like, here's what I think. Here's what I think about myself. What do you think? And from their perspective, they're like, well, I think you're higher on technical. I think you're higher on professional coaching. You're lower on mentoring. And so they had a little bit of a different take. And that was really valuable to me to hear their perspective. And now this isn't scientific, of course, but that was really valuable for me to help determine as an Agile coach where some growth opportunities are for me so I can help organizations better. So I think everybody gets a copy of these slides. So I would suggest everybody take this and kind of see where you think you are in this Agile competency model. Now, real quick about the Agile Manifesto. I'm not going to go into big details about this because you could spend 2 days talking about this. But the Agile Manifesto, and I only included the 4 values, not the 12 principles. Agile Manifesto is the foundation of our approach. The frameworks support the approach, or support the manifesto. One of the things to note, a lot of times we just focus on these principles and values, and a friend of mine, a fellow Agile coach, mentioned something that kind of blew my mind, and it kind of gave me a whole new perspective. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Taking that sentence alone, you could almost take away everything else. Your goal is to uncover better ways of developing software. It's not we have uncovered better ways. We are uncovering better ways. We are discovering, we're continuously improving. And that's where the focus of any team and any organization should be, uncovering better ways of doing things. So just kind of put that in the back of your mind to think about too. So this is where I'm going to start talking about kind of where we've gotten into some problems and where we've been as an Agile coaching community. So maybe some people have already seen this. I did not come up with this diagram, but there's really being Agile, there's Agile mindset, and there's doing Agile. The theory has been for many years, and many people still have this theory, that you start, excuse me, you start by doing Agile. And this is where we just choose a framework, we choose Scrum, let's say, we want to do Agile. Don't care about why they want to do Agile, they just want to do Agile. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we're going to use Scrum. We're going to have our daily stand-ups. We're going to do our sprint planning. We're going to write user stories. And that's what those circles represent. Those are all the practices of doing Agile. The theory is, and the theory has been, that if you start with the practices, that eventually teams will start understanding the purpose behind the practice, why we're doing that. The daily stand-up, the purpose is to collaborate and solve problems and to identify impediments, and to have that face-to-face communication, ideally face-to-face. So they go through the motions, they do it. So the idea is eventually you start moving to the left, and then you have a mindset. So let's say you start with Scrum and you have all those practices, and you might have some other things like test-driven development and pair programming, whatever the case may be. Well, if you come back maybe 2 years after a team starts that, and they've gone to the Agile mindset and they're thinking in Agile, those practices will likely look completely different. What has been found throughout the years is that that isn't true. So coaches have been teaching these frameworks, and then they go away and they get stuck at the framework. And for example, there's one team I had seen, there was another Agile coach that had introduced Agile. You know, it was basic Scrum, the normal things. And they were having some issues, and so they asked me to come take a look and help. And I looked at what they were doing, and they were doing exactly just by the book Scrum, meaning that they had not changed one bit in almost 5 years. They hadn't changed their processes at all. Now, one of the problems was that there was a governance over the Agile processes or Agile techniques, and they had implemented governance that said you can't change this. You have to do these things, and you have to be able to prove that you do these things. So there was an organizational constraint that prevented them from moving to the agile mindset. But even when there isn't that constraint, teams still get stuck in this. Well, we're just doing this, and we don't care why, we're just going to do it. When that happens, you don't see the value that Agile can truly bring. So I'm not sure what everybody's experience level is with the frameworks. So I'll just quickly go over a couple of these things. This is just out of the box Scrum, very lightweight framework. We have a list of work called the product backlog, typically in what's called user stories. Every sprint, which is a time-boxed event where you build software, you plan it at the beginning. You figure out how to turn those valuable deliverables into actual software, and that plan becomes your sprint backlog. Then the team starts working on it. Every day you have what's called a daily scrum, where you have a plan for the next 24 hours. Typically, people will answer these 3 questions. And then at the end, you have your sprint review, where you review what you've done with your stakeholders. You have potentially shippable software at the end, and then you inspect and adapt. It's magical, it's great, everything's awesome. But I've seen teams do this. They're doing all of these. They're going through the motions. They have the Scrum Master, which is the one that's typically facilitating, and really the Scrum Master I would consider the coach for the team. And they also coach outside of the team too. They're the ones that were responsible for helping guide them and increase collaboration. The product owner is the gatekeeper of the product backlog. They're defining the what. And this does look a little prescriptive, right? And that's one of the criticisms on Scrum. It's like it's so prescriptive, but there's a lot of wiggle room in here. As a matter of fact, the daily Scrum, people, the 3 questions are not even required anymore. Scrum itself evolves. And so when you get stuck in this prescriptive way of doing things, that's kind of where you're not going to the Agile mindset. We have extreme programming. So Scrum and extreme programming are the 2 popular methods. Extreme programming hasn't had the marketing power behind it. Everybody knows about it, but very few teams do extreme programming all by itself. Even though on the left, this is taken from extremeprogramming.org. The left, this flow is very similar to the Scrum flow. I mean, there is a lot of overlap. They use different terminology. So instead of product backlog, they have unfinished features. And it's changed a little bit over the years, but either way, the intent is the same. You plan your next iteration or sprint. Those are 2 interchangeable words, but extreme programming, they're called iterations. Scrum, they're called sprints. You daily communicate, and then you deliver at the end. What people usually take from extreme programming are these practices. Now, user stories, everybody equates user stories to Scrum. Nope, Scrum does not say anything about user stories. They were introduced by extreme programming. Test-driven development, TDD, also comes from extreme programming. So very few teams actually implement Scrum all by itself. Now, this is my favorite. Well, I don't know about favorite, but this is the Scaled Agile Framework, and I wanted to give a snapshot, and you can go to scaledagileFramework.com, and that's where I took this screenshot just from their homepage. Now they have SAFe. They have 4 different types of SAFe. This is the full SAFe, and this is an organization that says we want Agile top to bottom. So you can see at the top, we have the enterprise, and this is where we'll have our portfolio, our business initiatives, the company strategy, budgets, all those kinds of things. And at the very bottom, you'll see we have teams. And this is where SAFe says they'll have Scrum XP teams, extreme programming, or they'll have Kanban. So you can see there's a lot to follow here. This honestly is very controversial in the Agile community. A lot of Agilists say that having so much information kind of makes people think that it's a prescription. However, the originators of SAFe say, you just pick and choose what you want. I'm kind of in the middle, and the jury's out in my mind. I think many times it's a lot easier to have something to follow, and we'll just do that and it'll be successful. And you have to kind of know what you're doing, if you will, to be able to know where to change things, where to take things out, or where to add things. So you can get Scrum is incredibly simple. Extreme programming is pretty simple from a conceptual perspective, and SAFe a little bit is more complex. So over the years, I've been working on trying to get away as an Agile coach, and I'm seeing this in the Agile community. More and more people are doing this. They're trying to get away from being committed to one and only framework, one way of doing things. And so over the last couple of years, I've and these ideas come from me. So I've started with some of the writing them. These or to kind of fit they are. So their capabilities are. So the essential attribute of Agile is to have self-organizing cross-functional teams. Cross-functional teams should be self-contained. They shouldn't, and they should have very few dependencies. To get their work done, to deliver valuable software, they should not have to depend on other teams. I understand in complex corporate environments, it's hard to get around that. So, so if you can have these cross-functional teams that are also ideally cross-component. So cross-functional meaning you'll have all the roles you need to deliver something. Typically it's QA and software developers, maybe an architect, UX, analysts, whatever it happens to be, so you can reduce handoffs, which are also dependencies, right? Well, many times you have to reach out. What we see is that a team sometimes will have to, before they can do their work, they've got to talk to somebody else upstream that has to do their work because it's in a different system. And those create many dependencies, and that's probably one of the biggest problems that I've seen to impediments to agility. So ideally, they'd also be cross-component. So if you have some kind of valuable deliverable to a customer, but you have to have system A, system B, and system C all do a little bit of work, then ideally you would have people from system A, system B, and system C that work together as the cross-functional team. Now that's really challenging because things change so much. But it's again where the Agile community is starting to see that this is an important thing that we need to figure out how to address. Most importantly, they have to be empowered to continuously experiment to find improvements. They have guardrails. They can't just do whatever they want because they work in a company. So, but they have to be allowed to experiment, to try and fail something, to try, fail, learn, and then improve, which requires a lot of trust from leadership. So those are the attributes of the self-organizing team. They also need a product backlog. Now, product backlog is a Scrum term. I'm still kind of figuring out what really to call it. It's a list of work, the list of valuable deliverables at all levels in the organization. Teams have to know and get behind what they have to deliver, and they have to buy in to why it is they're building what they build. We don't want short order cooks. If you don't have a valuable product backlog work that the team finds valuable, it makes it very, very challenging. And these backlogs need to exist at all levels in the organization. At the highest level, it's typically your roadmap, your portfolio, whatever it happens to be, and then that will decompose down into smaller pieces, and all the way down to the sprint backlog that the teams work on for 2 weeks if they're doing Scrum. So we need the teams, we need the work, the valuable deliverables, and then this one I just recently added, an enabling architecture. Now, the enabling architecture is really a responsibility of the teams, but what happens is that teams will very quickly hit a ceiling where the architecture itself prevents them from becoming more agile. Monolithic architecture where there's just one giant app and the deployment is terrible, right? We have to be able to refactor. There's software craftsmanship that we have to attend to that will help us be faster, be able to develop in smaller batches. And we have to automate testing and deployment. And this is all so that we can deliver valuable software. That's the end goal. That's why we want to do this. So we can't forget that. And it's just what I have seen over and over again for over 10 years. These three things are really what you need. So if you're a coach, ask them or take a look at this and see what you can do, because these are the hardest things to accomplish. So let's talk about the problems that we have today. And I think I've boiled it down, and these are not new, but I'm personally surprised that they haven't been. I mean, they're still around, and in some cases they're propagating even more. So James Shore, an Agilist back in 2008, introduced the concept of cargo cult agile, and this is what he's seen. And this is based on, you can Wikipedia this too. It's based upon this story from World War II. There's indigenous tribes in Melanesia, in these islands, and during the war, the troops were dropping supplies to them, and modern things, clothes, tools, whatever it is. Well, then when the war ended, all those things stopped. And so someone said, hey, I have an idea. Let's go ahead and mimic what we saw those troops do and how they acted. And then those parachutes with supplies are going to start coming again. So they started building runways and fashioned clothes where they looked like the soldiers, and built wooden airplanes, and they were mimicking and going through all the motions, but nothing happened. And so that's where cargo cult agile, right? It's the same kind of a thing. You're just going into you're doing the rituals without understanding ideas. You're just going through the motions. You're not really improving. You have a daily stand-up meeting, but you're not really collaborating. Hey, we plan every 2 weeks. We have our sprint planning session, but we're not really delivering valuable software. Another problem is the one-trick pony. So I see a lot of coaches fall into this. I have to say, when I started, I was here too. That we will give you this cookie cutter solution, and this will work for you. I don't care what your specific problems are, because if you do this, it's going to work. And this is super common, right? And so we're going to implement Scrum on your team, and we're going to do it. And there you go. And so this is what I see over and over. And I see this as a remnant of some maybe newer Agile coaches, or some Agile coaches that, we're still kind of stuck in this. The teams get stuck in this. You must create tasks for user stories that are 1 day or less. You must use user stories in this format. 3 questions in the daily Scrum. You have to put story points in all your stories. Product owner and no one else can write the user stories. The Scrum Master must be the facilitator. And I see this over and over again. And none of these are required by Scrum. That's the funny thing. It's just that whatever they learned in the beginning, that's where they've stuck. That's their comfort zone. And this is where I was. It took me a while to get out of it. And then you're just there. And then teams wonder why it's not working. And then they end up hating Agile. This is ridiculous. And Scrum is horrible, or extreme programming, or whatever it happens to be is horrible. So doing these kinds of things as an Agile coach, saying it's related to the cargo cult Agile. Like, this will work for you. And it doesn't. And a lot of the times these are the problems that I go in and help fix. And then there's also ignoring the importance of management. Management plays a crucial role in an Agile transformation. And if an Agile coach goes in and ignores this, then there's some problems. So if a company wants to move to an Agile way of thinking, typically what I do is I will start with management and at first see kind of where they are. Sometimes people have a good mindset and they're not command and control, and maybe it'll work out fine. But if that's not the case, we got to start with leadership. Leadership provides the foundation on which the teams can be successful. You don't start with the teams. And this has been one of the biggest failures, and Agile coaches as a community need to start addressing this, and they're starting to. Seeing in the Agile community and on the forums, various forums, people are starting to finally go, oh, this is why there's challenges, right? So the teams themselves cannot solve all these organizational impediments. And there just are. Even getting a self-organizing cross-functional team, that you need support and buy-in from management. So coaches really need to push this and not ignore it. So some of the solutions, they're pretty simple, honestly. Start with why. So moving forward, the Agile coaching community really should, when they want to help a company, they need to understand what problems they're trying to solve. As opposed, and the problem isn't we're not doing Scrum. That's not a problem. There's actual business problems and business reasons why we want to improve our performance. And so some examples of problems could be our competitors they're so far ahead, they're leaving us in the dust. Our customers are telling us that we don't have the right features, but we think we do, and it takes forever to build them. Our app keeps crashing. We spend too much money. We can't spend this much money. We can't keep good talent, whatever the case may be, right? And then you start small and you start there. You should never introduce Agile in a big bang format. So, for instance, we're spending too much time and money in manual regression testing. Well, maybe we just focus on automation. And remember the competency framework that I showed you? We find maybe an Agile practitioner or an Agile coach who is high on the technical perspective and can really help them only focus on that. Do they need to do Scrum? I'm not sure. Maybe not. Let's just start there. We're not producing the right features. Well, we're spending so many time building things and our customers don't like it. Let's focus on how we learn from our customers first. Do we need to do Scrum? Maybe not. So let's put our efforts there. And so we need to focus on the problems. And again, in the Agile community, I'm starting to see that this is actually happening, and it makes me very, very happy. And then you can really customize. The answer isn't always to do Scrum. So along those lines, there has been something introduced in the last couple years called Agnostic Agile. And I believe this is a great tool for Agile coaches in the Agile coaching community. Since it's new, as with any new thing, there's been some pushback. In the Agile community, for those of you who are on the forums, you already know this, but they're very opinionated people. And they're always skeptical. That's great. I think it's good to be skeptical of everything. but they came up with this approach. And really the way I look at it is it's kind of a how medical practitioners, they have the Hippocratic Oath. And so like we have this oath that we're going to do these things as practitioners ourselves. So that's what this really is. It's not a methodology. It's an oath for Agile coaches and Agile practitioners. So you can go check it out at Agnostic Agile, created by Adrian. Adrian spearheaded this, and actually I've been in conversation with him over the last couple years, and it's I personally think it's amazing. These are all people in the UK, so it's slowly starting to make its way to the States, and I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to really promote this. So this definition, it's adaptive within our given system according to context, and is not by necessity a prescription of a particular framework. So this is all the problems that I've been talking about. This is helping address some of those problems, this dogmatic approach, this cookie cutter approach, right? Now there's 12 principles, and I'm checking my watch here, and so I want to leave enough time for questions. So principle, we want to put the customer first. Our goal in life is to help the customer. We want to teach them to fish. We don't want to just give them, here's what you do. And that's what a lot of that's what the Agile coaching approach has been. We're going to give you this solution. This is our personal solution. We've come up with its own framework. Here's Scrum. That will work. It will work for you, absolutely. To do my best complementing theory with practical practice. You have theory. Hey, I've read a lot of books, and a lot of theory I read, no, this won't work in this context, right? So you got to complement those two things. It's always contextual. When I talked about start with why, we need to tailor the agility to what their needs are. We don't want to push a framework. In Agile, we want to pull. We want to pull work through the system. The same thing is really is the same when we introduce Agile methods from a coaching perspective. We don't want to lay it down on you have to do this. We have to understand the constraints. There's organizational constraints, and you can't snap your fingers. You want to remove. You should not ignore the constraints, but you have to be very delicate in how you remove some of those constraints, right? So you have to always share, learn, and improve. As a practitioner, as an Agile coach, we have to learn, improve. There's always new things. We have to respect the other frameworks and their practitioners. There's Scrum people, there's Scrum trainers. I respect them a lot. They know a lot of stuff. And there's nothing against them. And sometimes there is animosity between framework owners, if you will. So we're saying, nope, let's get rid of that. We're all here to help each other out. Acknowledge the unknowns. Ask for guidance, right? So we're a community. We don't know anything or everything. So we don't know anything. If you don't know something, don't pretend you do. You know how many times have we been told this? And just in work in general. And you seek help, guidance from others. Never mislead. Don't pretend you know something when you do, or don't pretend you know something when you don't, etc. Agile isn't the end goal. Sometimes there's a more traditional approach may be appropriate. Sometimes Scrum isn't it. Sometimes maybe you shouldn't do this. Maybe you have if there's a lot of compliance and regulatory things, you got to do what you got to do. The end goal is to become better, deliver faster. Dogmatism to any framework is non-Agile. That's where I mentioned earlier. That's where I was. And I'm constantly have to work on getting out of that. And there's more to Agile than Agile. Remember the competency framework. There's a lot of other skills and a lot of other things going on. It isn't just Agile and knowing Scrum or extreme programming. And lastly, it's to give to the community. In the last couple of years in particular, I've really engaged with the community, and I have learned a lot from them, and I hope that a lot of people have learned from me. But it's kind of the responsibility of an Agile coach and really any Agile practitioner, because in these communities, there's all kinds of skill sets within there. So that's my spiel. That is my spiel. So let me see if you have any questions. I do have a question here. Would you consider Agile an expensive framework as compared to other methodologies due to continuous improvements, reinforcements of automation, full-time dedicated team members, etc.? It can be. So when it comes to enabling architecture that I talked about, you're going to have to invest in some training. If you don't have it, you're going to have to invest in some tools. However, from an expense perspective, what I see many times is that teams will have more roles. Their teams were based on waterfall, right? And so we have all these roles to perform handoffs. When you have cross-functional teams work together, you find a lot of efficiencies, and a lot of those the people who are responsible to create like heavyweight documentation, they can actually do other things. They can skill up in other areas. So I wouldn't say it's an expensive really framework, and a lot of times when you transition, if you hire an Agile coach, a lot of times the expense is really just from an Agile coach, and you're not going to you may experience things slowing down a little bit as you learn new things, and it depends on where your organization is, and that's why I think if you start small, that's where it minimizes the expense in the end. So start smaller. You don't want to start big. All right. Any other questions? Oh, come on, guys. Don't leave me hanging. All right. Well, there's some classes that we offer, and this will help any Agile transition. We have Agile for Leadership, and I mentioned earlier that leadership plays a critical role, and this class is all about explaining how leadership can help an Agile transition. Agile Foundations, that's for teams. Of course, I would always love it if managers would go to this too, but this gets into some of the mechanics of the common Agile frameworks. We also have Agile for project and program managers, and this is kind of a new offering, and I'm really excited about this one because when companies transition to project or from traditional project management to Agile, all of a sudden they're asked to be a Scrum Master, for instance. They don't know what that is, and so this is a really exciting class. And then also, it isn't just about software. You can implement these ideas in business too. So pretty excited about that class too. All right, I'm getting some feedback here. What are the best ways to handle those outer team dependencies when you can't have the cross-functional team, as you mentioned, either team or program level, example, architecture, UX, etc. We've been dealing with it by staggering the work up front. Oh, I feel your pain. So there's a couple things. First of all, I would help the teams try to come up with solutions themselves, because they probably have solutions. In the beginning, if you can't like get your cross-component teams together, then start with Kanban, just to try to track where your bottlenecks are. And then once that happens, you have to discover where your feature groups are that can support a cross-component team, and that's where it's really tough. And I see that you have architecture and UX though. Architecture and UX is tricky. I wouldn't put them as an upstream dependency. I would put them in the team. This requires leadership approval and guidance to do this. So yeah, it's a tough situation, and very common. Actually, I'm working with a client right now, and we're working through some of these things. Their context is unique, so we'll see what kind of unique solution we come up with. All right, what else? All right, give it just another minute here. Some things I'd like to mention. You have the deck, you have some links in there. If you, on LinkedIn, there are some user groups. I suggest that you join them. It's a wealth of knowledge. You can ask questions. There's the Lean and Agile Software Development user group. That is where a lot of the thought leaders are. They answer questions, and there's I think over 100,000 members in this, and it's from members all over the world, and it's very, very valuable. So I suggest you go ahead and look there, and then you'll get a kind of a bird's eye view also of what's happening in Agile and in the Agile coaching community, and kind of see where the trends are. So okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I really, really appreciate. Oh, let me go ahead. Hold on. I just got a question for the LinkedIn group. Let me. Just a second. I'm going to see if I can find the exact name here. It is called the Agile and Lean Software Development. Let me type it in here. That's the LinkedIn group. It is amazing. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. You'll have the deck, and I believe you'll also have a recording. It's been a pleasure. All right. Have a good day, everyone.